Gamers around the world are looking with big expectations towards Bioware/Electronic Arts for the next game in the Mass Effect universe as the next big AAA sci-fi game on the horizon. Especially after this year's N7 Days hyped-up release of a new teaser trailer. However, with what's been happening in the company lately, meaning the significant layoffs, some people are worrying whether Bioware will be able to actually pull it off, especially considering how much of their livelihood is depending on the success of the next Dragon Age Dreadwolf game, which will come out first. So, who could step in if anything should go wrong? Hey fellow gamers, Chatty Sisa here. Before I start, let me state on this spot that this is just my personal opinion and it might not be to everyone's liking, which is fine, but I wanted to voice some concerns and hopes that also other players might be sharing too. And I was specifically waiting for this year's N7 Day to see what and if EA and Bioware will release as for the news to the upcoming next Mass Effect game. Let me go back a bit in history first, when we're talking about Bioware. The company was founded in 1995 in Canada and had a breakthrough on the gaming market with the first Baldur's Gate games. They were working on the first game in the Mass Effect series still as an independent studio, with a huge focus on characterization, story and moral choices, and the studio was very successful in it, also amongst other things due to the experienced writers on the team. They've ensured that the dialogues felt authentic, the interactions made sense, we've seen wonderful character development and growth. All the characters had interesting backstories, often even some small side characters. The overall story arc and narrative was complex, yet incredibly intertwined, and most of all, the players' choices did matter and impacted the rest of the game. In October 2007, Electronic Arts bought them and Bioware became a unit of Electronic Arts. Still keeping their brand name and being relatively independent, they've released the first Dragon Age game in the series in 2009 and right then in January 2010, Mass Effect 2. Both games have been high-quality products that were carefully planned, written and executed with sufficient time to develop the story, characters and combat style. But Electronic Arts as the bigger entertainment software company was more focused on profit, sacrificing the essence of what made Bioware so great for revenue. Cue here microtransactions, introducing multiplayer into games that used to be single player, and a ton of DLCs which the gamers had to pay an extra for, not to mention the unpolished game elements. We can see the change between Dragon Age Origins and Dragon Age 2, where the second game felt rushed with repetitive maps and a few other flaws like bad inventory system, lack of customization, or enemies that suddenly randomly popped up from nowhere. The saving grace was still the complex story, the enhanced combat and the characters, which were very memorable and which many players loved. Again, in no small part thanks to the writers responsible for this portion of the game. Over the years, as the next games were in development, many original employees left or were laid off. There are of course still some experienced employees within the company, but the gamers are unsure if the current team will be able to pull off another fantastic game like the first 3 games in the Mass Effect series, and if they'll be able to avoid and learn from the mistakes that have occurred in Mass Effect Andromeda. While the combat system in Mass Effect Andromeda has brought in new elements and was in general one of the best features, alongside with great graphics and voice acting, the players mainly complained about too big and empty open worlds that made the impression to serve just as a filler, about reduced abilities during combat, confusing puzzles, and really bad animations. Which were partially fixed later, but who could forget all the "my face is tired" memes all over the internet. With a lot of the characters not so fleshed out, with a dialogue system that many players did not enjoy as it often wasn't clear what choice you're actually making, and it often led to undesirable outcomes for the players. In general, the depth of the story and the game itself wasn't received as positively as the studio has hoped for. We've seen more focused on exploration just for the sake of it and less complexity in the story and characters as expected by the fanbase. A lot of this is attributed to Electronic Arts trying to push out the game too soon, without enough room to properly develop and test it. We can clearly see the difference this year in 2023 compared to, for example, Larian's Baldur's Gate 3 game, which is funny as they've bought the rights for the Baldur's Gate games from Bioware. The Baldur's Gate 3 game was hugely successful, with Larian being one of the few studios left who do listen to their core audience and their feedback, and who spend enough time on the game's development, avoiding rushing anything too much, and rather providing a great quality in their end product. The game has also proven that you don't have to deviate from your core values to appeal to a new audience. But this isn't a sci-fi game, it's a fantasy game. And for Bioware, the next big game to come out is Dragon Age Dreadwolf, which is too within the fantasy genre and not sci-fi. If that one fails, meaning it's not profitable enough, it's very questionable when and if we're going to see the next Mass Effect, as the company might then simply reach their ultimate breaking point. Nobody wants to see more negative impacts to Bioware or Electronic Arts focusing then on something completely different. But Bioware truly needs Dreadwolf to succeed. I personally definitely do not want Dragon Age Dreadwolf or Mass Effect 5 to fail. They are some of my most favorite franchises. But with all that happened recently and is continuing to happen within the gaming industry extensively this year, I have some reservations. And for those who by some miracle didn't hear about it, Bioware released about 50 employees some 2 months ago, and amongst others, experienced writers or the technical director. We're looking here at people who wrote memorable characters like Varric or Meryl from the Dragon Age series, or one of Bioware's longest-serving employees who wrote, for example, Joker from the Mass Effect series. Funnily enough, they're hiring now again some new employees, and my own experience with working for large companies just tells me that this late summer layoff was to remove the high-paying senior workforce, and now they're trying to get the same job done with low-cost rookies. I really mean no offense here to the employees, this is rather a criticism of the Bioware/EA corporate HR practices, which I'm sick and tired of seeing happening. Some of the essential writers are gone that established beloved characters and ensured consistency in storytelling with great narrative. And the concerns among players about the quality of both Dragon Age Dreadwolf and the next Mass Effect game are understandable under these circumstances. I'm sure that both games will have outstanding graphics and action-packed combat styles. But this is not sufficient to ensure their success, as we could see with some of the previous games and the flops that also other studios have experienced due to poor writing and mediocre characters in recent years. Don't get me wrong, hopefully we'll get a great RPG and we see the new writers and devs rise to the occasion, but way too little is known as of now to remove all the doubts. Up until the end of 2020, Bioware was tweeting that a veteran team is working on envisioning the next Mass Effect game, but that it's still in its early stages. Since then we had, aside from a couple of vague tweets, concept arts and posters, only a fair amount of speculations. There was one official trailer released 2 years ago, And this year the studio played a game with the audience during the N7 day and had subsequently released 3 partial trailers, each lasting just a few seconds, forming together the teaser on the screen. I'd like to avoid speculations here on what this means for the next game and dissect the trailer as such, but keep in mind that this is still at the stage where the official company statement is that the game is in pre-production. Anything can still happen at this point. By the way, I've been quite active on Twitter, or X as it's now called, during the N7 day, so if you're as well on the platform, you can follow me there for more info and updates. And if you like this vid, please give me a like, share or consider subscribing. I'm posting twice weekly here on YouTube, always on a Thursday and on a Sunday. Thank you very much already in advance. But back to the topic. How much of the veteran team Bioware has previously mentioned in their tweets is actually still around? And how much of this team is working at this point on Mass Effect, when there have been all these layoffs and the confirmation that most of the workforce is focused rather on finalizing Dragon Age Dreadwolf? My guess is we won't know for quite some time still, and only the release of Dragon Age Dreadwolf could bring partially some answers. There's been a lot of rumors after this year's N7 day on when the next Mass Effect game will be released, and despite all the speculations, nothing is officially confirmed yet. So, who and when is going to be the next best hope for a new AAA sci-fi game with the same elements and feel as Mass Effect gave us in the past? Aside from Bioware, it might actually be Humanoid Origin, a company founded by Casey Hudson, who is a very well-known name to any player of the Mass Effect series as the original game's director and producer. He has spent the vast portion of the 2000s in Bioware, at first as a technical artist, later then as project director of the very successful Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic and then the Mass Effect trilogy games. It's clear that many people still blame Hudson for the original ending of the Mass Effect trilogy. The well-known blue, red or green endings without too much impact from any of Shepard's previous choices, and in general not giving the players any sense of real closure. I myself hated that ending so much that I'm only playing Mass Effect 3 now, either with the happy ending mod or not at all. But we should not forget that he was also the driving force behind the huge success of the entire franchise, and if we omit that bad ending, we have to acknowledge his and his team's great achievements here. The games are by now considered sci-fi game classics that influenced a whole generation of players. Incidentally, as you can see on the screen, the company is currently hiring too, just like Bioware, and I wouldn't be surprised if they would hire some of the former Bioware employees who have been on the original team and have been laid off not so long ago. Can we trust them fully when we know the failures from the past, when some of them are still part of Bioware? No. And can we trust Bioware fully when we've seen the backlash after Mass Effect Andromeda? Also no. But just like we put our hope into Bioware being able to create a fantastic new game within the Mass Effect franchise, we can put our hope into the experienced people at Humanoid Origin who can create something completely new on the same level of complex storytelling and great visuals. We shouldn't judge both of the studios based on their failures, but based on their successes. All in all, I'm really hoping to see Bioware to release the next Mass Effect game, especially after the hype they've created during this year's N7 day. And after Dragon Age Dreadwolf, for which I honestly wish nothing more than to become really successful. If Dreadwolf succeeds, we could see the workforce shifting at full speed towards finalizing the 5th Mass Effect game, and I'm sure we'll have even more to look forward to in our beloved franchise. But I'm also feeling optimistic that if this should not work out with BioWare for whatever reason, then there is another studio out there, Humanoid Origin, that might bring us a completely new sci-fi universe which could be on par with the Mass Effect series. In an ideal world, the best outcome would be if we would get both BioWare's Mass Effect 5 and Humanoid's entirely new sci-fi game. If that happens, it would be a sci-fi gamer's heaven. Let me know in the comment section below what you think of the whole situation at BioWare and what your expectations are for the future of sci-fi games. Thank you very much for watching, stay tuned and game on!